Well, our guest tonight is Gerald Celente, and he was a witness to a very important, I would say, confession from Governor Connolly. The first time he had visited the site of the JFK assassination since he was in the car with JFK and was shot along with JFK. It was 30 years after the assassination, and it was 20 years ago, shortly before he died. And he had a lot of things that he wanted to get off of his chest and a lot of amazing revelations. So here with that story is Gerald Celente. Welcome, Gerald Celente. It's great to talk to you.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Now, you're all about trends and Trends Journal, and here's one trend that I think is kind of alarming. We've seen for decades that 80% of the people don't believe the government's official story about the JFK assassination. 10% did, and another 10% were like, who's JFK? Now we're seeing those numbers drop. It's still 2 to 1 that don't believe the government's official story, but now that's down to about 60-30, and it seems to be falling. What do you think's behind that trend of people starting to believe the official story, no matter how preposterous?
As time goes by, people forget, so you have generations that weren't around when it happened and haven't seen all the information that puts question into what really happened and who did what. So as time goes by, history fades away. So new people coming in have really no relationship to the past.
That's right.
Only know what's being told to them.
And one of the things that's real important to have you on, one we wanted to talk to you today, was because of your relationship to the past. It was 30 years ago that you were able to talk to Governor Connolly, and it was the first time that he had revisited the area since the shooting. And he had some interesting things to tell you about the shooting as well as talking about the future, didn't he?
It was 1992, October 25th, just before the 1992 elections. And I got a call that John Connolly wanted to meet me. I got it on a Wednesday, and he wanted me to fly down to Dallas to meet him on a Sunday. He had read my book, Trend Tracking, that I wrote in 1989. Now remember, this is the 92 elections. It's George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot. When I wrote Trend Tracking back in '89, I said that there would be a new third party. People were pretty disgusted back then as well. And it was actually more of a movement for a third party than there is even today, even though people are more disgusted today. And for some reason, I mentioned Ross Perot as the type of political maverick. So Connolly wanted to meet me to see how I figured this out and to see what was going to happen with the elections and what would happen afterwards. He was impressed with the work. So I flew down there, and we had lunch at the Anatole Hotel. It was myself, a fellow by the name of John J. Hooker from Tennessee. Hooker ran for governor of Tennessee, barely lost, and he was a real gadfly. He was against the corporations and the rich funding campaigns. And actually, he was the guy that put Ross Perot on with Larry King. And if people go back to that time, it was on Larry King that Ross Perot announced that he was going to run for president. So it was Hooker, myself at lunch with Pat Cadell, the pollster. Cadell was he was polling for Ross Perot as well. And Perot was skyrocketing in the polls on this October 25th. It was a real horse race. Remember, Perot got almost 20% of the vote. And if you go back and watch that day on October 25th, they also aired 60 Minutes that day. And that was the time when Perot said he dropped out of the race during the summer because of his daughter's wedding and some other stuff. And he looked like a lunatic, and he really dove in the polls.
So he jumped the shark.
And another woman was... Excuse me?
Yeah, that's when he jumped the shark, isn't it?
Yeah, that was about it. And the other person there was Rama Fox, which was Larry King's girlfriend at the time, his fiancée. And so Larry King was involved in this, and she was there that day. And David, as we're having lunch, and remember, I'm the outsider there. You can see by this photograph of me and Connolly in front of the book depository. I'm not one of the guys. But as Connolly's speaking, I'm interrupting the other people and stopping them so I could hear what he was saying. And I have to tell you that I didn't like Connolly before I met him. What I knew of him was only what I knew on the media and hearing him and reading about him. And as he started speaking, the first emotion that went over me was embarrassment. I was embarrassed for having prejudged him. And every word that he was speaking was like a sentence, and every sentence was like a paragraph. Everything he was saying made sense to me. It reaffirmed what I already knew, but it really put it into the truest context. So I kept interrupting these people so he could talk. And as we finished lunch, Hooker booms out, "Well, John, the limousine's waiting for us." We were going to the book depository. This is Connolly's first time back since the assassination. He didn't even go to it when they made it a museum back in 1989. So the four of us pile into the limousine along with his wife, Nellie. And remember, this is their first time back, and we're parked out in front, and he starts telling the story. Now remember, the front of the book depository is not where we see where allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald was with the gun. That's the side of the book depository. And I'm sitting across from Connolly, and he starts telling the story of what happened that day. He said, "I heard a gunshot." He said, "I looked over to my right." He said, "I knew it was a gunshot because I've been hunting since I'm a little boy." Now remember, we're parked out in front of the book depository, so looking over to his right is looking over at the grassy knoll, where people say they first heard the gunshot coming from.
Wow.
He explained how he was scrunched up in the jump seat. They had jump seats in those days in the limousine. And he said he was wearing a dark blue suit that day, holding his Stetson hat on his knee. And he said, "I looked over to my left, and there were brains on my shoulder." He said, "I know there were brains because my daddy was a butcher." And then they went on to explain what happened, how Nellie, how he went like this. He said, "Then I felt as though there was a pounding on my back." And I'll never forget the way he had his fists and his face distorted. And that's when he said he went flying forward when the bullet ripped through his back, through his chest, through his hand, and through his knee. And that's when Nellie threw herself on top of him.
Wow.
And then Connolly goes on to say that in this chaos, they got to Parkland Hospital in about 10 or 12 minutes. He said it's usually about a 20-minute ride. And as life would have it, as the motorcade comes screaming into Parkland, there's this doctor that's on break and sees the motorcade, and he goes running down to the emergency room. And it turns out that this is the doctor that works on Connolly. But the doctor happened to be a thoracic surgeon.
Wow.
What are the odds of that?
Just what he needed.
A lung wound. His lung is blown open, and he gets a thoracic surgeon to work on him. I mean, you go to an emergency room, you're lucky if anything happens.
That's right.
Now remember, Nellie is on top of him. He's bent over, his hand compressed to his chest. That's what saved his life, as Connolly told it. Because the lung wound, when the hole comes out, it's even bigger than when it goes in. The air, he would have suffocated from it. But because of the compression, and of course because he gets a thoracic surgeon to work on him, he lives. We get outside and we start taking photographs. This woman, Rama, there's a Polaroid camera that she took the shot with. And as we're out there, all of a sudden, from nobody out there, hundreds of people are coming around. They're saying, "Oh, there's John Connolly, there's John Connolly." He was very gracious, by the way. Other people are taking photos with him. We get back in the car, and I'm sitting across from him, and all of a sudden it clicked in me. This guy's ready to die. He's speaking like a dying man. Remember, he has a lung wound. I have a photograph here. I don't know if you can see it or not. This is my father. May his soul rest in peace. Just before he died, had a going away party for him. You can look at his hands. He has these big red splotches on them. My father died of asbestos poisoning from working in the shipyards. Connolly was on heavy doses of prednisone back then. His pulmonary condition was acting up again. And they had, I think it was adhesions that he had or something. And they were trying to stop the swelling and and the discomfort. So they put him on prednisone like they did my dad. And Connolly had these purple splotches. And when you look at that photo of me and him, he's hunched over. And that's what starts to happen. So I knew that I've seen this picture before. And I said to Hooker later that day, John Hooker, I said, Connolly's going to die soon. And he did. He died in June of the following year. Again, remember, we meet in October of 1992. He died in June of 1993. And we kept in contact, by the way, up until April.
You know, Gerald, that reminds me very much of Robert McNamara. Just before he died, they filmed that documentary he got with the documentary filmmaker, and really kind of confessed about everything that he had done in Vietnam, even going back to World War II. And the same sort of thing is happening here, I think, with John Connolly. You know, they've kept these secrets, and they know they don't have much time. They know that they're dying, and they really want to make a confession to somebody. So just like McNamara talked to the filmmaker, Errol Morris, he's kind of telling you what happened, telling you that he heard shots coming from the grassy knoll.
Yeah, and they also said, he and Nellie, they repeated several times that they heard 3 shots. We heard 3 shots. I mean, they kept saying that. So now we're going back to the hotel. We get back in the limo, and there's complete silence. No one's saying anything. Remember, I'm sitting across the room. We pull up. The other 4 people get out. He and I are the last to walk in, and he stops me just as we get to the doors, and he looks at me, and he said, I read your book, Trend Tracking. He said, it's a fine piece of work. He said, I know your heart's in the right place. He said, you don't have a clue what's going on in the government. And neither did the American people. He said, because if they did, there'd be a revolution in this country. Now remember, this is coming from the guy who was the governor of Texas when he got shot. He goes on to become the United States Treasury Secretary. By the way, at a time when the United States finally pulled itself completely off the gold standard.
Yeah.
He's the guy that ostensibly told Richard Nixon to pack up his gear, the game was over. And he's telling me, a guy from the inside at the highest level, that if the American people knew what was going on, there'd be a revolution in this country. Now, that was 20 years ago, 21 years ago. Look how obvious it is now at the levels of corruption. Hey, the Defense Department doesn't know what happened to $8.5 trillion, according to Reuters. This isn't a left-wing operation. This is as mainstream as you can get.
Yeah.
One criminal activity after another, and he's putting it right at the heart of where it is, the military-industrial complex.
Absolutely. And no matter what we find out, no matter how bad it is, whether it's Benghazi or the next scandal, they just move on. They replace one scandal with another one, and nothing is ever done. We find out that they're spying on everybody's records, and they admit it, but then they want to jail the guy who exposed their criminal activity, do nothing to reform it.
Exactly. And by the way, it's the entire system.
Yes.
So that people think that, oh, there's a candidate in the Republican Party, or there's a candidate in the Democratic Party, and they're going to make a difference. You know, grow up. You're not going to change the Bloods or the Crips or the Bananas or the Gambinos.
Absolutely.
It's a mafia.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's an amazing story. And like I said, I think after 30 years after the assassination, he'd kept this all pent up. He had never gone back there. He went back there, and you were with him when he went back to the scene of the assassination, and he really wanted to get that off of his chest. Amazing revelations, and amazing what he was predicting would happen in the future, that so many things that we've seen, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And actually, it's time for the revolution.
Yes.
And of course, and I keep saying this, so I want to make it really clear. I'm talking not a violent one. I'm talking about a moral, spiritual, and an intellectual revolution. You know, we could change this by us doing it in a proper way. And yeah, I have to say to you that never before has the opportunity been better because the vacuum is so large. Look at
Absolutely.
Washington. Look
Absolutely.
at Obama's poll ratings. Look what people think about Congress. 10% approval rating for Congress. So the time is now.
Yes.
And Connolly was ahead of his time.
Absolutely. After 20 years, we've seen exactly what he was talking about. And I hope that we can bring that to fruition, a nonviolent revolution. Because if we don't get a nonviolent revolution, the government's going to get increasingly violent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Celente. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for sharing that. That was an amazing story.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's exactly right. We need a nonviolent revolution. We've seen a total revolution in the way the government acts, and it's a matter of educating people. And if you want to spread the information, you can become a subscriber to Prison Planet TV. It helps us support our operation here, and it's a way that you can pass information on to your friends and family. Up to 10 other people can view it simultaneously with you. Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.
Why is nascent iodine so important?
Nascent iodine is so important because it goes directly to the thyroid. It's not bonded to a salt, which means it doesn't have to be broken down, and it's the most usable form. It's what the body uses. It's what the body is designed to use. If you have low energy levels, if you have pains, if you have thyroid problems, if you don't feel up to par, well, they've proven now that the fluoride and a lack of iodine causes a decreased IQ because you have all this stuff that builds up inside your system and builds up and builds up. And that's why some people, when they start taking iodine, will have what's called a Herxheimer reaction or a detoxification reaction. But that's a good sign. That means you're detoxifying all that fluoride buildup, the mercury buildup in there, the bromine buildup in your system, and the chlorine buildup in your system. You don't want those things. All of those things have been proven as carcinogens. That's one of the reasons prostate cancer is on the rise too, is because prostate takes up iodine, and the men that are lacking iodine causes the prostate to become cystic and causes the prostate to swell and eventually leads to prostate cancer. There's been an extreme rise in polycystic ovarian disease, PCOS, with women, fibrocystic breast disease, because iodine is stored in the breast tissue, the ovaries, the prostate glands in men. It's utilized by every single cell in the body.
Why does this almost taste good compared to other iodine that tastes horrible? That's because it's real iodine, atomic form.
We wanted something that's going to go straight into the bloodstream and straight into the thyroid gland. We wanted to put it in a vegetable glycerin base. That's a USP kosher certified vegetable glycerin base. And that product is not tested on animals. It's vegan friendly, it's gluten free, it's GMO free.
Of all the things I've done, nascent iodine was just absolutely amazing. So we developed with Dr. Group a double strength, low price. InfoWarsLife.com, Survival Shield, the atomic nascent iodine, available right now.